What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Vlogmas. It is day 13, and today, if you can see in front of me, we're going to be building a bag. So if you take a look at, this is my bag right here. If you take a look at it, we got all Innova, except for one Millennium Draco, but that's a Calvin Heimberg disc, so it's really kind of Innova anyways. We're all Innova. Everything in here is Innova. I don't throw any other companies. At one point I threw a Zone, at one point I threw a Buzz, at one point I had Judge. Those are all in the past. I only throw Innova. And that's what's worked for me for the past year. It's a helicopter. Now, as I stated in Vlogmas Day 1, I eventually do want to play professionally. I eventually do want to push past 1,000 rating, and that's going to eventually mean picking up a sponsor. And the chances are that sponsor is Innova is statistically pretty low, considering that there are a lot of other options. So I may be sponsored by Prodigy, I may be sponsored by Discraft, who knows. But what I do know is if I do get sponsored by one of those companies, I'm going to have to get familiar with their discs pretty quickly. So what I decided to do was I picked 6 companies to look at. So we have Latitude 64, MVP, Prodigy, Discmania, Discraft, and Dynamic Discs. And I picked from their lineup what I think would replace the discs in my bag the best. Now, this is not going to take into account sort of the feel of the disc, how they actually fly. This is going basically primarily off of flight numbers, like raw flight numbers, and sort of anecdotes I've heard or specific experiences I've had throwing those discs, which are very minimal because, like I said, I've only thrown Innova for the majority of my time playing disc golf. So why don't we get started here? Let's make a new bag. We're going to call this No Innova Bag. Vlogmas Day 13. All right. And then let's keep one open of my old bag so we can reference it. Okay, so I have created a bunch of categories of discs that I want to cover. Those consist of a stable distance driver, so that is going to be my Halo destroyers, my regular distance drivers, so all of my other destroyers. Obviously they're going to be different runs and different stabilities of those, but we're just going to simplify it down to just one. Then we have the straight fairway drivers, so that's going to be like your Eagle, your sorta stable fairway, so like not quite straight flying, a little bit of stability, so more like a Thunderbird. T-Bird 3 could probably fit in that slot. Then we have the overstable fairway, so that's just your standard Firebird. Your flippy fairway, so a T-Bird. T-Birds I find beat in and become pretty flippy. Your straight flying mid, so for me, that's going to be a Rock 3, a Champion Rock 3. A flippy mid, so a KC Pro Rock, it's pretty flippy for me, or a DX Rock. A stable mid, so a Rock X3 or a Cayman. An approach putter, so for me that's Pig or Toro. And then a putting putter, so that's going to be my Whale. The one thing I'm not going to add to this list is my understable throwing putter and my roller. I feel like a roller disc can just be any flippy disc that you can get to stand up or any disc that you've gotten beaten in, so there's no real reason to add that to the bag, and it's more of a utility disc. Same for the flippy putter. I feel like you can just take any throwing putter and beat it in, so I don't think that's that important. If you want to know what understable throwing putter I would throw, just take my putting putter and throw it in a different pocket in my bag. Okay, so starting off with the Halo Destroyer, or the Distance Stable Driver, our option from Latitude 64 is the Stiletto. MVP is the Energy. From Prodigy is the D Model OS. From Discmania is the PD3. From Discraft is the Nuke OS. And from a Dynamic Discs is the Enforcer. So right off the bat, the ones that I'm most familiar with are probably the Nuke OS, the PD3, and the Stiletto. The other ones I don't know much about. I haven't seen people throw them as much. I think the D Model OS is also probably pretty good for a stable driver. I'm torn between Stiletto and Nuke OS, but I think I'm probably going to go with Nuke OS because I think that is pretty widely regarded as a pretty good disc. Okay, next up is my destroyer, my distance driver. So from Latitude 64, we have the Ballista. From MVP, we have the Photon. And just as we go forward with the MVP discs, I didn't do Axiom and stuff, so I'm just going from MVP. So there's not like, I think MVP's flight numbers and discs are tend to be kind of weird. So there's not super great fits for all of them. So just keep that in mind. From Prodigy, we have either the D2 or the D1. From Dynamic Discs, we have the Cloudbreaker or the DD3. From Discraft, we have the Nuke or the Zeus. And from Dynamic Discs, we have the Trespass. I think that's like the Destroyer equivalent. There were some other ones that looked similar, but I think the Trespass is like regarded as similar disc to the Destroyer, although I'm not 100% sure. For this one, I think I'm just going to go with the Cloudbreaker DD3. I think it's most similar to a Destroyer. I think Cloudbreakers are supposed to be a little bit more flippy than the recent runs. I could maybe go with the Nuke or the Zeus. I think those are pretty reliable and pretty similar to a Destroyer. And I think the Prodigy ones are also pretty good, but from what I know and from what I've thrown, I think the Cloudbreaker is probably the best option. All right, those are the distance drivers. Assume I have a bunch of different stabilities and wears and forehand and backhand and all that. But those are the two ones that I'm going to have in. I'm going to have an overstable one and a slightly less stable one. And imagine I'll probably put in Cloudbreaker and DD3. Okay, now we have the straight fairway. So from Latitude 64, we have the Falchion? Don't know how to pronounce it. From MVP, I went with the Volt. Kind of similar to an Eagle, I guess. From Prodigy, I went with the F2. From Discmania, I went with the FD2. From Discraft, I was in a toss-up between the Stalker and the Undertaker. And for Dynamic Discs, I went with the Escape. So this one's kind of tough. I don't really know. I think FD2 is pretty good. That's kind of like, it's kind of like a T-Bird. I don't really know how those beat in. You know, now we're kind of getting to the point where there's going to be small differences in the disc where I don't really know how they're going to fly. And I have to go just based off of the ones that I know the most about, which for all of them is pretty minimal. I think for this one, I'm going to go with the F2. I think it has the most similar flight numbers. Haven't picked a Prodigy disc yet, so I'm going to go with that one. And for all of these drivers, just imagine that they're all in premium plastic. I don't know exactly what plastic each brand has, but just say they're in premium plastic for just all of them, except for the putters and maybe some of the mid-ranges, but, you know, whatever works. All right, now we have my sort of stable fairway, so not like a Firebird, but not also like an Eagle, kind of more like a T-Bird 3 or a Thunderbird. So for Latitude 64, we have the Striker. For MVP, I went with the Volt. For Prodigy, I went with the H2. For Discmania, I went with the FD2. For Discraft, I went with the Vulture. And for Dynamic Discs, I went with the Gateway. This one's kind of a tough one. I don't think a lot of other companies have quite the same as like a Thunderbird / T-Bird 3. I think I'm going to go with the Striker, though. I think it lines up most with what I want out of this disc based on the flight numbers. And yeah. All right, now we have the overstable fairway, so that is the Draco or the Firebird. For Latitude 64, I went with the Pioneer. For MVP, I went with the Motion. For Prodigy, I went with the F Model S. For Discmania, I went with the FD3. For Discraft, I went with the Raptor. And for Dynamic Discs, I went with the Felon. I think I'm torn between FD3 and Raptor because both of those have like Raptor and then Captain's Raptor, and then even with Discmania, you have the FD3, and then you also have the Splice. So there's kind of like two discs that are very similar but fill the same slot, where there's like a stable one and like a little bit more stable. I think I'm going to go with the Raptor in this case. I think the Captain's Raptor is like, again, one of those really popular discs. A lot of people tend to like them, and I think they're very reliable. So just based off of recognition alone, I'm going to go with the Raptor. All right, next up we have the Flippy Fairway. This is kind of your hyzer flip fairway or turnover fairway. That's my T-Bird is used for primarily, so straight to flippy flying, kind of a lower distance range. For Latitude 64, I got the Explorer. For MVP, I have the Shock. For Prodigy, I have the F1. For Discmania, I have the Instinct. For Discraft, I have the Athena. And for Dynamic Discs, I have the Evader. This one's kind of tough because this is like the T-Bird, right? This is the disc that pretty much every company has some version of. We even have the Athena coming out. I think there's probably another one, but Athena is the one that I picked because it's the newest one. I'm tempted to go with the Athena. I think it's kind of a little bit more stable maybe and could probably beat in. I don't know too much about it, so I'm tempted to go with that, but I think I'm going to have to stick with Prodigy here and just go with the F1. I think the F1 is just a solid disc. It is what it is. It's like a T-Bird, right? That's all I want it to be. I don't want it to be anything special. It's just, you know, F1. It's in the name. It's just fairway one. All right, next up is the mid-ranges. So we're going to start with the straight flying mid. So that is my Champion Rock 3. So for Latitude 64, I picked the Mace. For MVP, I went with the Reactor. For Prodigy, I went with the M1. For Discmania, I want the MD3. For Discraft, I want the Wasp. And for Dynamic Disc, I want the EMAC Truth. I think this one's probably a no-brainer. I think the EMAC Truth is just a solid disc. Can't really go wrong. There's a lot of discs you can put in that slot for a stable driver, but I think EMAC Truth has that name recognition. A lot of people really like it, and it's just a super reliable disc. All right, next up we have the Flippy Mid. So that's my beat-in rock, not rock threes, my beat-in rocks, my beat-in KC rocks or DX rocks. So for Latitude 64, I went the Compass. For MVP, I went with the Axis. Yeah, the Axis. For Prodigy, I went the M4. For Discmania, I went with the MD. For Discraft, I went with the Buzz. And for Dynamic Disc, I went with the Fugitive. This one is like the easiest no-brainer of the whole bunch. It's the Buzz. There's no disc quite like the Buzz. 100% going in my bag if I'm a Discraft guy, like 100%. All right, now we got the stable mid. So this is my Cayman replacement. So we got Latitude 64's Trident. MVP is the Deflector. Prodigy is the M1. Discmania is the MD5. Discraft is the Buzz OS. And Dynamic Discs is the Justice. Now this one's kind of tough because a lot of companies don't really have sort of a specific disc to fill that stable mid slot. I would say the Buzz OS is maybe the closest one that a company has that really fills that slot. Maybe the Prodigy's M1 as well. But even for Innova, you have the Rock X3, you have the Cayman, you have the other animal disc the Gator. There's a bunch of different discs for each company that kind of have ways to fill this slot, so there's a lot of variability. For this one, I think I'm going to go with the Deflector. I don't know if there's a better, maybe the Vector would also be good, but I'm going to go with the Deflector. It seems like it's pretty stable, has a decent amount of glide, which I tend to like out of these. A lot of these stable mids are kind of like so stable that they don't have any glide, and I like them to still be stable but have some glide, and I think the Cayman is like pretty good at filling that slot, so I think the Deflector has the most glide out of these. Okay, I actually take it back. The Buzz OS actually has more, but it's kind of a toss-up between the two, so I'm just going to put them both down. All right, we got the Approach Putter. This is your Zone, this is your Pig, this is your Slammer, okay? So I already gave away two of them, but for Latitude 64, I have the Sinus. Latitude 64 doesn't really have a disc that fills this. I think even Emerson Keith throws the Wasp, so they don't really have like a zone-style disc in their lineup. So I went with the Sinus, although I don't even think it really fills the slot that well. For MVP, I went with the Entropy. For Prodigy, I went with the A2. For Discmania, I went with the Tactic. For Discraft, gotta go with the Zone. And for Dynamic Discs, Slammer. This is a toss-up for me. I like the A2, but I also like the Slammer. I'm going to put them both in because I think the A2 fills in that like Toro slot, and the Slammer is kind of like a pig. So I'll put them both in. But I think the Slammer probably is the better one because it's basically a pig, and that's what I throw the most. Well, apparently I literally can't add the A2, so I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And then we have the Putting Putter. So this is going to be the like least set in stone one that I would end up using because this is entirely dependent on feel. So we have the Dagger from Latitude 64. We have the Nomad from MVP. Prodigy, we have the PA2. From Discmania, we have the P2. From Discraft, we have the Luna. I have Discraft Luna and Challenger, my bad. And from Dynamic Discs, we have the Judge. Just based on the fact that the only one of these discs that I've actually thrown is a Judge, I'm going to probably say that one. Although I think that I probably would also like a P2, but I'm going to go with the Judge just because it has the beads. That's going to be the easiest for me to transition to from the Whale. So there is my bag being replaced company to company, the one that I thought best filled the slots in my bag. You have the stability chart right here. Looks pretty overstable, but obviously I would have different levels of wear for each one of these, so you would start to fill out the right side of the chart a little bit more. This is very interesting. I definitely think it's better to know about other discs from other companies. Gives you a better idea of what options are out there. Obviously, you don't want to be buying every version of the Zone from every company and every version of the Destroyer from every company because you would very quickly start to run out of money. Unless you have that kind of money, then I guess go for it. But now in the future, if I ever get sponsored by another company, I have the ability and the knowledge to go and pick those discs out from those companies and give them a try. So that's my Vlogmas Day 13. I hope it was interesting. I hope it helped you gain some knowledge, and I hope you come back for tomorrow. Peace.